Hi, I'm Anya, and I'm here to lay something spiritual on ya. Still don't know if I like that. It's cheesy, but is it too cheesy? Who knows? Here we go. All right, so today I wanted to talk to you guys about the Wheel of the Year. Now, if you're familiar with pagans or paganism or any sort of like earth-based natural faiths, you might have heard of the Wheel of the Year, but maybe you don't really know what it means, what it signifies, why it's important, things like that. So I thought it might be a good thing to sort of give a brief overview of what the Wheel of the Year is and what each of the different holidays on the Wheel of the Year signifies in relation to Earth, the sun, and you know, the seasons of the year, things like that. I'm gonna try to learn to start off with disclaimers because that's just who I am as a person. But we do need to just note that while a lot of pagans might talk about the Wheel of the Year and they might be aware of the holidays associated with the Wheel of the Year, not all celebrate them. You know, they're all celebrated a little bit differently. Some are considered lesser holidays, some are considered greater ones. Some people might just not look at them as holidays at all. This is all fine. You know, it's sort of a subjective thing. We do what feels right for us in life, and as long as we're not harming anyone, do as you will. In addition to that little disclaimer, let me also state that I'm not gonna go through a big expansive explanation on all of these holidays because I plan on doing videos in the future that dig deeper into each of these holidays and festivals as we get closer to them in the Northern Hemisphere. I'm in Scotland, thus I'm in the Northern Hemisphere, so I'll be making more videos to explain these in a little bit more detail as we get closer to these holidays. So this is just to give you a general overview of what the Wheel of the Year actually means. So, let's get into it. The Wheel of the Year refers to the life cycle of the entire year. As the Wheel of the Year refers to the life cycles of nature, so too does it follow along these natural changes in the nature and the seasons, but also in the sun's position in the sky. As such, there are 8 holidays and festivals that follow along this Wheel of the Year that many pagans celebrate or acknowledge in some way that also represent important stages in where we're at in nature and the natural world around us, and the sun's overall strength. Each of these are spaced out around 6 to 7 weeks apart, so you can sort of look at them from that aspect of this length of time away from each other. These 8 holidays are known as Yule, Inbulk, Astara, Beltane, Litha, Ludenasa, Maven, and Samhain. You might not know all of these words, and actually, if you're a pagan yourself, you might have other words for these holidays. I will get into the other names that sometimes accompany these holidays on the Wheel of the Year as well. As we get into it, I'll ask you guys to also be thinking about the natural life cycle, you know, from birth to death, and how we all as individuals have these different stages in life that we all go through. Think about that as I'm talking about a lot of these holidays, and you'll begin to see how we share connection to the Wheel of the Year. And it also might be beneficial if you think of the sun in the sky as the god, the male aspect of divinity, and the earth as the goddess, the female aspect of divinity, Mother Earth, if you will. So if you think about those things, that also might be beneficial in terms of understanding the cycle of the year and how pagans connect to it. So while I'm working with the Northern Hemisphere, I also want to recognize that in the Southern Hemisphere, the holidays are actually sort of opposed to ours. So I will try to keep that in mind as I talk through these holidays and festivals in this video. So we'll start with Yule. Yule can also be referred to by a number of names. I often call it the winter solstice, the longest night, or midwinter. These all signify what this time of year is meant to be. In the Northern Hemisphere, this roughly occurs between the 20th and the 22nd, or maybe even the 24th of December. Again, it's associated with the winter solstice. So that marking point of the change of seasons, right there, that's Yule for you. In the Southern Hemisphere, and if someone in the Southern Hemisphere wants to check me on this, it's a-okay. Yule is often celebrated around the 20th to the 24th of June. So again, sort of polar opposite of us on the Northern Hemisphere. If I'm not mistaken, again, please let me know. I've been a Northern Hemisphere person all of my life. So Yule, our longest night, actually signifies the rebirth of the sun. The winter solstice is the marking point of the longest night, as the name would suggest. And at this stage, if we make it through the longest night, we can recognize that after this, after making it through this, we are bound to start seeing the days grow longer in the natural cycle of things. So essentially this night is where the god is reborn, as we see the sun increasing in strength, and thus returning to a state of fertility. So as such, Yule starts us off on this new life cycle on the wheel of the year, because obviously, life begins with a birth. So the birth of a year and the new wheel of the year officially begins with the birth of the sun. The second holiday on the wheel of the year would be known as Inbulk. In the Northern Hemisphere, this is around February 1st. In the Southern Hemisphere, I believe this is around August 1st. So at this time, we start to see more signs of life. We see spring is attempting to come in. In the natural world, we might start seeing the first snowbells and wintry flowers popping up out of the ground. We might start to see the animals of early spring starting to more fruitful, if you will. We might see the sheep beginning to lactate in preparation for lambing season. In terms of people and individuals, this might be the time where we start doing things like spring cleaning and preparing ourselves, because we know that newness is coming. We're starting to see more of these changes in nature that have started to begin because the sun is starting to return to its strength. Our days are getting longer and our nights are slowly starting to get a little bit shorter. And because of that, we are starting to see this refresh of nature herself. The natural world is slowly beginning its blossoming, slowly coming out of hibernation once more. And that's where this celebration of Inbulk comes in. From there, you go to Astara, also known as the spring equinox. So in the Northern Hemisphere, this is probably sometime around the 20th to the 24th of March, and in the Southern Hemisphere, it's probably around the 20th to the 24th of September. Again, we're changing seasons. We've moved on from winter, and now we are welcoming in the spring. We can see that the daylight and the nighttime hours are almost equal at this point. It's sort of a celebration of growing fertility. We're seeing a lot of pastels and flowers blooming. We're seeing, the laying of eggs. Life is returning in springtime, and that is the cause for celebration at this time of the year. At this point, the god and the goddess are thought to be uniting and beginning the blossoms of their own fertility rituals, but it's also thought, because we are in this stage, this in-between stage of light and dark, where daylight and nighttime hours are sort of as equal as they're going to be for the year. There's been other suggestions that this also represents the duality of the god's nature, being in between this very sexual and lustful deity, but also being aware of his own love and desire for the goddess, in a sense. Something that is both sexual, but also perhaps on the verge of more committed. Not there totally yet, but it's this recognition of these two inner natures of man, also in connection with the god himself. And we can kind of understand this concept if we understand a little bit about human nature, the desire for deeper and mature love and connection and commitment, but also the absolutely human aspect of sexual desire. So we can kind of see this both occurring at this stage of the life cycle. And again, as we go through these seasons, we're just starting to see the changes. It's almost like a life of growing. So at this stage, you would consider these two, the god and the goddess, to both just be young lovers with all the potential and the room for growth, but not exactly at that stage of maturity that they would be in order to reach their greatest potential. So at this stage, they might be more like the youth and the maiden of masculine and feminine archetypes. From here, we go on to Beltane. So Beltane in the Northern Hemisphere is May 1st. Beltane in the Southern Hemisphere is around the 31st of October. Beltane is sort of this unofficial start to summer. It's this recognition that we have made it beyond the dark seasons. We've made it past the winter months. We're no longer going to have these nights that are longer than the days. And it's a celebration of this return to warmth and heat and prosperity. And also, yes, fertility. Beltane is a time of the year where you will start seeing things growing and flourishing to their best. At this point, the goddess is starting to reach her own great state of fertility and her own greatest potential, because life and fertility are at their peak during Beltane. We can see this in the natural world. We can see this in how green everything looks, how the natural world is flourishing. This stage, we can also start to see that the god has gone from this sort of more animalistic sexual being to being one of full commitment to the goddess, because his own strength continues to grow as the sun continues to grow. Again, think about the goddess as nature herself, the natural world, and the god as the sun in the sky. As he grows and matures in his own strength, so too does his devotion to his partner, the goddess, and his own strength continues to support her and the life upon the earth itself. From here, you go on to Litha, the summer solstice. The summer solstice in the southern hemisphere is December 20th to the 24th, but in the northern hemisphere, Litha, or the summer solstice, is around June 20th to June 24th. So Litha, summer solstice, also sometimes known as midsummer, this is the point where the sun is at its greatest peak. The god is at his highest peak of strength and virility, because this is the point where the sun is at its greatest point. In complete opposition to midwinter or Yule, the days are at their longest, so the sun is at its strongest point, which means the god is at his strongest point. But it is also a turning point, just the same way Yule is a turning point. So at this stage, it's a turning point in that from here, we are going to start seeing the days getting shorter, which means the god is slowly losing his own strength. So again, if we think about these in terms of masculine and feminine archetypes, if Beltane to Litha is around the time where we see the god and the goddess start being more the father and the mother, from this stage, we start seeing the god beginning to lose his own strength as the natural cycle of life progresses. And a lot of people might hear this and think that this means it's a time of sadness. Absolutely not. Not a cause for sadness, but a cause for awareness, to enjoy and live life while we have it. And isn't that kind of what summer is all about anyway? From there, you go on to Ludenasa, sometimes called Lammas. Ludenasa is the 1st of August in the northern hemisphere and about the 1st of February in the southern hemisphere. So Ludenasa marks our first harvest. It's at this point that the seeds that we sowed in our winter months and in our early spring months, we should have seen growth through the late spring to the summer months, and at this point they are ready to be harvested. We are ready to start looking at what we have sown and what we have grown, and essentially just celebrate the work that we have done in order to get here, but also start making those preparations for the approaching winter months, which in the back of our mind we should be thinking is approaching. In terms of the god and the goddess at this stage, essentially this would be the stage where the god would sacrifice himself, giving himself over to the dark half of the year for the sake of the goddess, her own life and the life that she carries. So the sun, essentially, sacrifices himself for the earth to ensure the life of the fruit that she bears herself. So whether you're looking at this as the sun and the earth or the god and the goddess, it's sort of one and the same, but it's this idea of sacrificing to ensure that life continues beyond yourself. And at this stage, we will start seeing the god, after his sacrifice, going into rest for the winter months. Slowly from this point at Ludenasa. Then we have Maven. Maven in the northern hemisphere is about September 20th to the 24th, and in the southern hemisphere is around the same time in March. This Maven is also just known as the autumn equinox. This is another harvest festival, another time of harvesting, looking at what seeds we have sown, which have taken root, which have grown, and which are ready to be harvested now, which need more time to grow, which need tending to. This is what the harvest months are all about, the preparation, because we know soon we're going to be back into hibernation and planning mode. So at this point, the god himself is sort of descending into his space of hibernation, and some stories might look at that as he goes to the underworld for rest, whereas other stories I've read look at him as going into nature herself to rest, you know, going into a cave to sleep there for the winter. But obviously, as with a lot of things, this is all symbolism. We're still talking about the sun in the sky, but we do see at this stage the sun is starting to begin to rest again. For the goddess, she would start her transition from a mother-like figure of her own fertility into something like the Cailleach or hag or the crone. Now, let me stress, none of these words are bad, evil, scary words. We have a bad habit in society to look at people in older stages of life as though they are less than. And that's wrong. We can hear the word hag and we have associations with it, but at least in paganism, it's not seen as a bad or evil term. It's a recognition that life occurs in stages. None of us are going to stay young and youthful, at least in our looks, forever. So don't be looking at these stages or these words as though they are something negative. They're part of the life cycle, and they are a beautiful part of the life cycle. Although, you know, in some pantheons, the Cailleach is thought to be harsh lady of winter and things like that. And yeah, that's, you know, there's some connotations there, but you know, maybe we'll talk about that in another video. After Maven comes the big holiday, the holiday I recorded my first video on, and that is Samhain. Samhain is probably the most beloved time by a lot of pagans. It is a big holiday, and most of the pagans I know absolutely love Samhain. And I don't know, I can't explain it to you, because once I tell you a tiny little bit about what Samhain's about, you might be thinking, why would you like that? But let's get into it. So Samhain occurs in the Northern Hemisphere around October 31st. That's right, Halloween. In the Southern Hemisphere, Samhain occurs around May 1st. So Samhain is our final harvest of the year. It is essentially the death holiday. It's this death of the year. We are at the very end of this wheel of the year, the cycle of life. So this is when we are collecting all of the final harvests that we are going to get from the seeds that we have sown throughout the year. It marks the end of summer. We are returning to winter. Life is going dormant. Things are going into hibernation, and we ourselves need to start considering doing that as well. Although, being humans in a modern age, we have to think of different ways to hibernate these days. Because of this, because it's a time associated with death and transition, it is thought that the veil between worlds is thinning. So again, at this point, the god is already in rest and in hibernation, whether in the underworld or in his cave in nature. In some instances, the goddess may decide to visit him in the underworld, which could cause the thinning of the veils, or she herself might be going into the cave to rest with him and provide comfort for the winter months. But obviously, as I just mentioned, the idea of the Cailleach, the hag, or the crone, some pantheons might believe that a goddess of winter carries on through these winter months but becomes, you know, bitter and cold. There's a lot of different ways that different pantheons and mythologies can look at these stories, but when we're talking about the wheel of the year, we're talking about this cycle of birth and early life and growth and understanding and expansion to our full potential and fertility and virility and the things that we can grow and achieve in life if we want to and if we work hard, while then also reflecting on the times of going inward and reflecting on what we have gained, what we have grown, what we have sown, and recognizing that at that stage of our life, a new strength comes in, and looking towards the end of our life and what are we still here to do? What stories do we have to share? What can we dedicate our lives to and even sacrifice ourselves for the betterment of another? And then also reflecting on the transition that is the end of life. But let's remember, as we talk about it, we're talking about a year and life and nature herself. It all goes through this life cycle, and so do we every single year. And that's why we think about it at these different holidays and festivals in paganism. I think there is something so beautiful about the wheel of the year and the stories behind it. Each different pantheon has a little bit different stories, and they're all fascinating. But what is most interesting is that they all have these similar themes of rebirth and life coming back to the world and growth and expansion and ultimately coming towards this transition to the end of life. And as much as that can weird some people out, there is something so inherently beautiful about it. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope there's been some things you've been able to take away from it, and I hope you've been able to get a better idea of what we're talking about when pagans refer to the wheel of the year. I've tried to keep it brief on some of the explanations, but what I will do in the future as we approach these holidays, again in the Northern Hemisphere for me, I'll create videos that expand on them a little bit more. If you have any questions and if there's anything you'd like to see a video on, please let me know. Thanks guys. Anya out. Bye.